Hello, book lovers. Welcome to session 6 of the series of guided reading of Charlotte Bronte's The Professor. I have my notes here ready for our session today. It's a beautiful day outside, blue sky, and I'm very excited to continue our discussion of this novel by Charlotte Brontë. So, today we're going to read chapters 13, 14, and 15. But what happened last time? Let's refresh our memories. So, last time we read chapters 10, 11, and 12, and this is what we read about. William is excited about a life of vivid impressions, as he puts it, vivides impressions, if I'm not mistaken, in French, at the girls' pensionnat. So he had been living the life of a boys' pensionnat teacher for a few weeks, and things started looking dull and boring to him again. He wanted some new excitement in his life. So when he was asked to teach English at the school next door, the school for girls only, he thought, wow, there's some excitement there. Remember that in his room, he had a window that looked out the girls' pensionat's garden, but it was blocked, it was closed. So he had that ideal, he romanticized a lot. So he started romanticizing about the garden and the girls' pensionat. But life is not as exciting as his romantic imagination. So when he does cross to the other side and he starts his teaching activities at the girls' pensionat, well, reality is not that fun. In fact, the girls are not well behaved. They are not dedicated angels as he had fantasized. In fact, the chaos there is even worse than the chaos in the boys' pensionat. There are especially three girls, the three in the front, the dreaded trio, Eulalie, Hortense, and Caroline, or Caroline, perhaps. Those three are the worst. So they keep trying to get William's attention and to disrupt the class, but William is very rigorous and he wants to show authority. As a teacher myself, I think it's so interesting to read this book, to have a glimpse at what education was like, or not education, teaching methodologies were like in the early 19th century, early to mid 19th century. The priorities in language, he's a language teacher. I've been a language teacher as well. So priorities for a language teacher then was reading, flawless grammar, flawless pronunciation, but they don't communicate, right? Communication was not, eventually it was a goal, but it's the learning of a new language was based on reading, listening, and copying, right? So that's quite interesting to draw this parallel with modern contemporary teaching methodologies, foreign language teaching methodologies. Also about the control of the classroom. Of course, things have changed in so many different angles, but the teacher had full authority and classes were teacher-centered, right? And there was a lot of TTT, teacher talking time. In fact, it was only TTT. Students were supposed to listen, to get the knowledge, to appreciate the knowledge, and to copy, take notes, and reproduce. Nowadays, the focus is on making the student an agent of participation in their own learning process. Of course, it's a very modern thought that was not, we cannot expect that kind of thought from 19th century schools. So that's why it's important to put the book into its context. I'm not expecting teachers like William Crimsworth, 19th century teacher, to have this very modern mindset. Of course not. But it's different. It's very interesting to draw these parallels. Uh, all right. So Monsieur Pelé is interested in knowing how William is doing at the girls' pensionnat and how he's been getting on with the directress, Mademoiselle Reuter. And he says that she will want to find his weak point. So we learn that Mademoiselle Reuter is a very strong woman, independent woman, and she's referred to as a diplomat, a politician. So she's very crafty. And Monsieur Pelé says that she will find a way to get to William, that he should look out. And in a way, she does. She does find his weak point. She showed care for him when he was feeling indisposed, so he was not feeling that well, and she showed kindness. And this kindness, even if just a facade, I'm pretty sure William knew that it was just a facade and it was just a tool to get to him. He let himself go reluctantly, and that made him look at her in a different way. And one day they sat alone in the garden, the symbolic garden. Remember, there is no such repetition of the same. If something is repeated in literary studies, you should pay extra attention to it. So the garden is mentioned several times. So it has a symbolic importance in the novel. And we talked about it last time. A garden is already essentially symbolic, since it evokes certain images, especially the Garden of Eden and the utopian paradise for Adam and Eve prior to the fall of man. So, where the first sin was committed, and so on, the biblical story. Of course, that is evoked when you hear the word garden, especially if it's described in such an idyllic way as it is here. So, they were in this garden, and the mistress, the headmistress, was very lovely and asked for a flower. And of course, William started romanticizing the whole affair. Alone in his room, he wanted to look out the garden. Now that he was teaching at the girls' pensionnat, he was allowed to remove the boards and to be able to look outside at the garden. So he wanted to look out the garden to recollect their memories together. And there he heard first, and then he saw Mademoiselle Reuter talking with Monsieur Pelé. And what is more, they were talking about their impending marriage. So William feels betrayed and he's burning with jealousy. And that's where we left off last time. So let's get our copies of The Professor and let's continue our reading. We'll start with chapter 13. So let me know if you have your own copy of The Professor. Let me know if you annotate your books. I love writing on the margins. I think it really helps to engage with the story, with the characters. And next time I read it, or when, for example, I look at the chapters I've read to make notes for these sessions, the annotations help me immensely to, for example, prepare this little summary that I give in the beginning of each session. All right, so chapter 13. Next morning, and that is the morning after the evening that he spent with the headmistress in the garden, and also after he later heard her talking to Monsieur Pelé about their impending marriage. Next morning, I rose with the dawn, having dressed myself and stood half an hour, my elbow leaning on the chest of drawers, considering what means I should adopt to restore my spirits, fagged with sleeplessness to their ordinary tone, for I had no intention of getting up a scene with Monsieur Pelé, reproaching him with perfidy, sending him a challenge, or performing other gambados of the sort. I hit at last on the expedient of walking out in the cool of the morning to a neighboring establishment of baths and treating myself to a bracing plunge. The remedy produced the desired effect. I came back at 7 o'clock, steadied and invigorated, and was able to greet Monsieur Pelet when he entered to breakfast with an unchanged and tranquil countenance. Even a cordial offering of the hand and the flattering appellation of mon fils, pronounced in that caressing tone with which Monsieur had, of late days especially, been accustomed to address me, did not elicit any external sign of the feeling which, though subdued, still glowed at my heart. Not that I nursed vengeance, no, but the sense of insult and treachery lived in me like a kindling, though as yet smothered, coal. God knows I am not by nature vindictive. I will not hurt a man because I can no longer trust or like him, but neither my reason nor feelings are of the vacillating order. They are not of that scent like sort where impressions, if soon made, are as soon effaced. Once convinced that my friend's disposition is incompatible with my own, once assured that he is indelibly stained with certain defects obnoxious to my principles, and I dissolve the connection. I did so with Edward, his brother. As to Pelé, the discovery was yet new. Should I act thus with him? It was the question I placed before my mind as I stirred my cup of coffee with a half pistolet. We never had spoons. Philip, meantime, being seated opposite, his pallid face looking as knowing and more haggard than usual, his blue eye turned, now sternly on his boys and ushers, and now graciously on to me. Circumstances must guide me, said I. And meeting Pelet's false glance and insinuating smile, I thanked heaven that I had last night opened my window and read by the light of a full moon the true meaning of that guileful countenance. I felt half his master, because the reality of his nature was now known to me. Smile and flatter as he would, I saw his soul lurk behind his smile, and heard in every one of his smooth phrases a voice interpreting their treacherous import. So now he feels he's the master of Monsieur Pelet because he knows more than Monsieur Pelet is aware of. He knows about Pelet's relationship and impending marriage to Mademoiselle Reuter, but Monsieur Pelet does not know that William knows. So remember, knowledge is might. So he has a power over him. But Zoraide Reuter, of course, her defection had cut me to the quick. That sting must have gone too deep for any consolations of philosophy to be available in curing its smart. Not at all. The night fever over, I looked about for balm to that wound also, and found some nearer home than at Gilead. Gilead is a biblical place. Reason was my physician. She, Reason with a capital R, she began by proving that the prize I had missed was of little value. She admitted that, physically, Zoraide might have suited me, but affirmed that our souls were not in harmony, and that discord must have resulted from the union of her mind with mine. She, Reason, then insisted on the suppression of all repining, and commanded me rather to rejoice that I had escaped a snare. Her medicament did me good. I felt its strengthening effect when I met the directress the next day. Its stringent operation on the nerves suffered no trembling, no faltering. It enabled me to face her with firmness, to pass her with ease. She had held out her hand to me that I did not choose to see. She had greeted me with a charming smile. It fell on my heart like light on stone. I passed on to the street. She followed me. Her eye, fastened on my face, demanded of every feature the meaning of my changed and careless manner. I will give her an answer, thought I. And meeting her gaze, full, arresting, fixing her glance, I shot into her eyes from my own a look where there was no respect, no love, no tenderness, no gallantry, where the strictest analysis could detect nothing but scorn, hardihood, irony. I made her bear it and feel it. Her steady countenance did not change, but her color rose, and she approached me as if fascinated. She stepped onto the straight and stood close by my side. She had nothing to say. I would not relieve her embarrassment, and negligently turned over the leaves of a book. I hope you feel quite recovered today, at last she said in a low tone. And I, mademoiselle, hope that you took no cold last night in consequence of your late walk in the garden. Quick enough of comprehension, she understood me directly. Her face became a little blanched, a very little, but no muscle in her rather marked features moved. And calm and self possessed, she retired from the straight, taking her seat quietly at a little distance and occupying herself with netting a purse. I proceeded to give my lesson. It was a composition. I dictated certain general questions of which the pupils were to compose the answers from memory, access to books being forbidden. Another example of the sort of very strict 19th century teaching methodology. Everything by memory and not um, uh, with no access to books. So critical analysis was not really a priority, but memory and repetition, yes. I'm going to close the window. I don't know if you hear the noise outside. They are redoing the pavement on the street. So I don't know if you can hear that noise, but to avoid further um, further noise, I'm going to close the window as this is live. Bear with me 1 minute. I'll be right back. There I am back. I hope this helps to. Oh, Sofiane said the sound is perfect, not noisy. Great. So just for precaution, the window is closed. Excellent. Great to have you here live, Sofiane. Uh, so let's continue. While Mademoiselles Eulalie, Hortense, Caroline, etc., were pondering over the string of rather abstruse grammatical interrogatories they had propounded, I was at liberty to employ the vacant half hour in further observing the directress herself. The green silk purse was progressing fast in her hands. Her eyes were bent upon it. Her attitude as she sat netting within 2 yards of me was still yet guarded. In her whole person were expressed at once, and with equal clearness, vigilance and repose. A rare union. Looking at her, I was forced, as I had often been before, to offer her good sense, her wondrous self control, the tribute of involuntary admiration. She had felt that I had withdrawn from her my esteem. She had seen contempt and coldness in my eye, and to her, who coveted the approbation of all around her, who thirsted after universal good opinion, such discovery must have been an acute wound. I had witnessed its effect in the momentary pallor of her cheek unused to vary. Yet how quickly, by dint of self control, had she recovered her composure. With what quiet dignity she now sat, almost at my side, sustained by her sound and vigorous sense, no trembling in her somewhat lengthened though shrewd upper lip, no coward shame on her austere forehead. Look at the words he uses to describe her and how he admires her self control, composure, dignity, sense, austere. So she is all about reason and sense. Um, he admires that in her, but he's going to use the same weapon against her. He's being led now not by his sentiments, but by reason with capital R. There is metal there, I said as I gazed. Would that there were fire also, living ardor to make the steel glow. Then I could love her. Presently I discovered that she knew I was watching her, for she stirred not. She lifted not her crafty eyelid. She had glanced down from her netting to her small foot, peeping from the soft folds of her purple merino gown. Thence her eye reverted to her hand, ivory white, with a bright garnet ring on the forefinger, and a light frill of lace round the wrist. With a scarcely perceptible movement, she turned her head, causing her nut brown curls to wave gracefully. In these slight signs, I read that the wish of her heart, the design of her brain, was to lure back the game she had scared. A little incident gave her the opportunity of addressing me again. While all was silence in the class, silence but for the rustling of copybooks and the traveling of pens over their pages, a leaf of the large folding door opening from the hall unclosed, admitting a pupil who, after making a hasty obeisance, ensconced herself with some appearance of trepidation, probably occasioned by her entering so late, in a vacant seat at the desk nearest the door. Being seated, she proceeded, still with an air of hurry and embarrassment, to open her cabas, to take out her books, and while I was waiting for her to look up in order to make out her identity, for short sighted as I was, I had not recognized her at her entrance, Mademoiselle Reuter, leaving her chair, approached the estrade. Monsieur Crimsworth, said she in a whisper, for when the schoolrooms were silent, the directress always moved with velvet tread, and spoke in the most subdued key, enforcing order and stillness fully as much by example as precept. Monsieur Crimsworth, that young person who has just entered wishes to have the advantage of taking lessons with you in English. She is not a pupil of the house. She is, indeed, in one sense, a teacher, for she gives instruction in lace mending and in little varieties of ornamental needlework. She very properly proposes to qualify herself for a higher department of education, and has asked permission to attend your lessons in order to perfect her knowledge of English, in which language she has, I believe, already made some progress. Of course, it is my wish to aid her in an effort so praiseworthy. You will permit her then to benefit by your instruction, n'est-ce pas, monsieur? And Mademoiselle Reuter's eyes were raised to mine with a look at once naive, benign, and beseeching. I replied, "Of course," very laconically, almost abruptly. "Another word," she said with softness. "Mademoiselle Henri has not received a regular education. Perhaps her natural talents are not of the highest order, but I can assure you of the excellence of her intentions, and even of the amiability of her disposition. Monsieur will then, I am sure, have the goodness to be considerate with her at first, and not expose her backwardness, her inevitable deficiencies, before the young ladies, who, in a sense, are her pupils. Will Monsieur Crimsworth favour me by attending to this hint?" I nodded. She continued with subdued earnestness. "Pardon me, monsieur, if I venture to add that what I have just said is of importance to the poor girl. She already experiences great difficulty in impressing these giddy young things with a due degree of deference for her authority, and should that difficulty be increased by new discoveries of her incapacity, she might find her position in my establishment too painful to be retained, a circumstance I should much regret for her sake, as she can ill afford to lose the profits of her occupation here. So this is interesting. There is a new person, let's say a new person in the class. That is Mademoiselle Henri, and she is not a pupil. She's not a student. She's in fact a teacher at the pensionnat, a teacher of needlework, but still. So she's in a higher position than the other girls, although in a lower position than the teachers of other subjects such as English, reading, history, etc. But she wants to attend the lessons by William Crimsworth to perfect her English so she can have better opportunities in the future. And Mademoiselle Reuter, the directress, asks William to take her in and not to draw too much attention to her, especially to her mistakes, because she does not want to undermine her authority in front of the other girls. Mademoiselle Reuter possessed marvelous tact, but tact the most exclusive, unsupported by sincerity, will sometimes fail of its effect. Thus, on this occasion, the longer she preached about the necessity of being indulgent to the governess pupil, the more impatient I felt as I listened. I discerned so clearly that while her professed motive was a wish to aid the dull, though well-meaning Mademoiselle Henri, her real one was no other than a design to impress me with an idea of her own exalted goodness and tender considerateness, So, having again hastily nodded assent to her remarks, I obviated their renewal by suddenly demanding the compositions in a sharp accent, and stepping from the straight, I proceeded to collect them. As I passed the governor's pupil, I said to her, "You have come in too late to receive a lesson today. Try to be more punctual next time." I was behind her and could not read in her face the effect of my not very civil speech. Probably I should not have troubled myself to do so, had I been full in front, but I observed that she immediately began to slip her books into her cabas again, and presently after I had returned to the straight, while I was arranging the mass of compositions, I heard the folding door again open and close, and on looking up, I perceived her place vacant. I thought to myself, she will consider her first attempt at taking a lesson in English something of a failure. And I wondered whether she had departed in the sulks, or whether stupidity had induced her to take my words too literally, or finally whether my irritable tone had wounded her feelings. The last notion I dismissed almost as soon as I had conceived it, for not having seen my appearance of sensitiveness in any human face since my arrival in Belgium, I had begun to regard it almost as a fabulous quality. Whether her physiognomy announced it, I could not tell, for her speedy exit had allowed me no time to ascertain this circumstance. I had indeed, on two or three previous occasions, caught a passing view of her, as I believe has been mentioned before, but I had never stopped to scrutinize either her face or person, and had but the most vague idea of her general appearance. Just as I had finished rolling up the compositions, the 4 o'clock bell rang. With my accustomed alertness in obeying that signal, I grasped my hat and evacuated the premises. And that's the end of chapter 13. William can be very inconsiderate at times, right? And he's also very self centered. So he thinks that Mademoiselle Reuter is asking him to be nice to the uh, Mademoiselle Henri, uh, because he thinks she wants to show him how good, how benevolent she is. And he does not believe that is a genuine concern. So he doesn't really care about it. He even scolds her for being late for the class, and she leaves very embarrassed. He doesn't even look at her. Um, so he is very self-centered and inconsiderate for the feelings of others. So let's see. I'm very curious about this new character, Mademoiselle Henri, this governess pupil who wants to improve her education so she can get better prospects, but is a very shy person. Let's see if we get to know more about her in chapter 14. If I was punctual in quitting Mademoiselle Reuter's domicile, I was at least equally punctual in arriving there. I came the next day at 5 minutes before 2, and on reaching the schoolroom door, before I opened it, I heard a rapid, gabbling sound which warned me that the Prière du Midi was not yet concluded, the afternoon prayer. I waited the termination thereof. It would have been impious to intrude my heretical presence during its progress. Remember that religion is a big theme here, because there's a religious conflict, cultural conflict as well. Um, William is an Englishman, he's an Anglican, he's a Protestant, and he's now in Belgium in a Catholic environment. So there is this clash. So he calls himself an intruding heretical presence as a Protestant in this afternoon prayer, Catholic afternoon prayer. How the repeater of the prayer did cackle and splutter. Oh, sorry. I waited the termination thereof. It would have been impious to intrude my heretical presence during its progress. How the repeater of the prayer did cackle and splutter, I never before or since heard language announced with such steam engine haste. Notre Pierre qui est au ciel went off like a shot. Then followed an address to Marie Vierge Céleste, Reine des Anges, Maison d'Or, Tour d'Ivoire. And then an invocation to the saint of the day, and then down they all sat, and the solemn question mark, rite was over. So he did not really consider it. He's being ironic, sarcastic here. He didn't really consider that solemn ritual since it had been done in such haste because it was time for the next class. And I entered, flinging the door wide and striding in fast, as it was my wont to do now. For I had found that in entering with aplomb and mounting the estrade with emphasis consisted the grand secret of ensuring immediate silence. Oh my, I wrote here on the side. Oh my. What was the expression that the girls had used to refer to him in French? Blanc. In English, the translation would be white beak. I really want to find it. Blombeck, a white beak, a young man without experience, but really yes, Sufyan said Blombeck. Yes, very self-conceited and thinks he has to prove himself all the time to ascertain his authority. So he arrives in the classroom with aplomb and flinging the door wide open, striding in fast to ascertain his authority and to get the girls to pay attention to him and to be in silence. The folding doors between the two classes, open for the prayer, were instantly closed. A maîtresse, workbox in hand, took her seat at her appropriate desk. The pupils sat still with their pens and books before them. My three beauties in van, and he's referring to Eulalie, Hortense, and Caroline, my three beauties in the van, now well humbled by a demeanor of consistent coolness, sat erect with their hands folded quietly on their knees. They had given up giggling and whispering to each other and no longer ventured to utter pert speeches in my presence. They now only talked to me occasionally with their eyes, by means of which organs they could still, however, say very audacious and coquettish things with their eyes. Had affection, goodness, modesty, real talent ever employed those bright orbs as interpreters, I do not think I could have refrained from giving a kind and encouraging, perhaps an ardent reply now and then. But as it was, I found pleasure in answering the glance of vanity with the gaze of stoicism. Youthful, fair, brilliant as were many of my pupils, I can truly say that in me they never saw any other bearing than such as an austere, though just guardian might have observed towards them. If any doubt the accuracy of this assertion, as inferring more conscientious self-denial or Scipio-like self-control than they feel disposed to give me credit for, let them take into consideration the following circumstances which, while detracting from my merit, justify my veracity. So he's going to give an example. If you, reader, do not believe what he says, that he is a very just, though austere guardian, and self he is self-deniant and Scipio-like self-control. Now Scipio refers to Scipio Africanus, a Roman general, so really military self-control and self-denial. So he's going to give an example to you. No, oh incredulous reader, if you do not believe him, do you believe him though? I do not know. Sometimes, well, we see that he's very soft underneath it all because he's very sentimental about nature. He romanticizes life. He wants to experience vivid impressions. Um, we know that about him because we are reading this novel in the first person narrative. So we get insight into his deeper self. But the facade that he shows to the world as a teacher in his social interactions is that of someone with a lot of self-control and authority. And you might not believe me. If he thinks the reader does not believe him, it's because perhaps he doesn't believe it himself. If he feels the need to justify and to prove, perhaps he does not believe that he is essentially that person either. Let's see. Let's take a look at the example he gives us. Know, O incredulous reader, that a master stands in a somewhat different relation towards a pretty light-headed, probably ignorant girl to that occupied by a partner at a ball or a gallant on the promenade. Now he's going to make this distinction about a girl who is a pupil at school, plain and probably silly, probably ignorant, he says, and a girl dressed for a ball. There is a big difference, he says. A professor does not meet his pupil to see her dressed in satin and muslin, with hair perfumed and curled, neck scarcely shaded by aerial lace, round white arms circled with bracelets, feet dressed for the gliding dance. It is not his business to whirl her through the waltz, to feed her with compliments, to heighten her beauty by the flush of gratified vanity. Neither does he encounter her on the smooth-rolled, tree-shaded boulevard, in the green and sunny park, whither she repairs clad in her becoming walking dress, her scarf thrown with grace over her shoulders, her little bonnet scarcely screening her curls, the red rose under its brim adding a new tint to the softer rose on her cheek. Her face and eyes, too, illumined with smiles, perhaps as transient as the sunshine of the gala day, but also quite as brilliant. It is not his office to walk by her side, to listen to her lively chat, to carry her parasol, scarcely larger than a broad green leaf, to lead in a ribbon her Blenheim spaniel or Italian greyhound. No, he finds her in the schoolroom, plainly dressed, with books before her. Owing to her education or her nature, books are to her a nuisance, and she opens them with aversion. Yet her teacher must instill into her mind the contents of these books. That mind resists the admission of grave information. It recoils, it grows restive, sullen tempers are shown. Disfiguring frowns spoil the symmetry of the face. Sometimes coarse gestures banish grace from the deportment, while muttered expressions, redolent of native and ineradicable vulgarity, desecrate the sweetness of the voice. Where the temperament is serene, though the intellect be sluggish, an inconquerable dullness opposes every effort to instruct. Where there is cunning but not energy, dissimulation, falsehood, a thousand schemes and tricks are put in play to evade the necessity of application. In short, to the tutor, female youth, female charms are like tapestry hangings, of which the wrong side is continually turned towards him. And even when he sees the smooth, neat external surface, he so well knows what knots, long stitches, and jagged ends are behind that he has scarce a temptation to admire too fondly the seemly forms and bright colors exposed to general view. Oh my. He has a very low regard of females in general. He does not think that the girls are capable of learning, of dedication to studies. He finds them generally ignorant and avert to study, avert to reading, um, and the teacher must be the presence that makes them read, makes them study, tries to instill some knowledge in them, although that will probably not work. So that's how a teacher looks at the girls. Um, he does not look at her as he would look at a girl at a ball. Those are different contexts, different expectations, different social conventions regarding that sort of exchange. And look at how the image that he creates. So a teacher sees a girl like that in the school environment, plain, ignorant, so on and so forth. So he sees as if the wrong side of the tapestry, where all the knots and the long stitches and the mistakes are there. So even when you see the other side, the girl brightly dressed and beautiful hair, etc., he knows what is on the other side. So he cannot fully appreciate that beauty, you know. Sofiani asks, I have a question. When we engage in literary study, particularly in the context of Charlotte Bronte's novel The Professor, should we assume that Charlotte's personal beliefs align with those characters? Specifically, when exploring religious and cultural differences between Protestants and Catholics, should we zoom out and distinguish between the author and the main character, William? Yes, there is always a separation, right? The author is one entity, the narrator is another. In first person narratives, this line is a little bit blurred, right? We tend to make associations between them, the narrator, first person narrator, and the author, but it is important to make a distinction that this is not necessarily the case. It does not mean that William's attitude to um, religious conflicts or to cultural issues are the same as Charlotte Bronte's. Um, we cannot assume that she thought like her characters, right? So it's important to make that distinction. So what we're talking about is how William feels. If Charlotte felt the same, we will never know, right? Of course, an author does not write in a vacuum. In a vacuum. um, an author brings their own experiences, their beliefs, their life experience into writing. So of course there are traces, there are echoes of Charlotte Bronte here in everything she's written, but we will never know because we never knew Charlotte personally, right? All we have access to is her literary production. So all the assumptions, all the interpretations we make refer to the characters, never to her. Yes, it's interesting to make connections. Like she also spent some time in Belgium. She also worked as a governess. She also worked as a teacher. So, yes, I'm sure there is a lot of her own life experience in William's experience, but we can never assume that necessarily. We can speculate. We can always speculate, but we'll never know for sure. I hope that answers your question. Um, right, so let's continue. Our likings are regulated by our circumstances. The artist prefers a hilly country because it is picturesque. The engineer a flat one because it is convenient. The man of pleasure likes what he calls a fine woman. She suits him. The fashionable young gentleman admires the fashionable young lady. She is of his kind. The toil-worn fagged, probably irritable tutor, blind almost to beauty, insensible to airs and graces, glories chiefly in certain mental qualities: application, love of knowledge, natural capacity, docility, truthfulness, gratefulness are the charms that attract his notice and win his regard. This he seeks, but seldom meets. These, if he by chance he finds, he would fain retain forever. And when separation deprives him of them, he feels as if some ruthless hand had snatched from him his only ewe lamb. Such being the case, and the case it is, my readers will agree with me that there was nothing either very meritorious or very marvelous in the integrity and moderation of my conduct at Mademoiselle Reuter's pensionnat de demoiselles. My first business this afternoon consisted in reading the list of places for the month, determined by the relative correctness of the compositions given the preceding day. So he's ranking his students. The list was headed as usual by the name of Sylvie. We mentioned her, that plain, quiet little girl I have described before as being at once the best and ugliest pupil in the establishment. Sylvie was the one who was going to be a nun. So she was very smart. I'm a very intelligent, but very shy. And according to William, very plain and even ugly. The second place had fallen to the lot of a certain Leonie Ledru, a diminutive, sharp-featured, and parchment-skinned creature of quick wits, frail conscience, and indurated feelings. A lawyer-like thing, of whom I used to say that had she been a boy, she would have made a model of an unprincipled, clever attorney. But not a girl. A girl could not be an attorney back then. Then came Eulalie, the proud beauty, the Juno of the school, whom 6 long years of drilling in the simple grammar of the English language had compelled, despite the stiff phlegm of her intellect, to acquire a mechanical acquaintance with most of its rules. No smile, no trace of pleasure or satisfaction appeared in Sylvie's nun-like and passive face as she heard her name read first. I always felt saddened by the sight of that poor girl's absolute quiescence on all occasions, and it was my custom to look at her, to address her as seldom as possible. Her extreme docility, her assiduous perseverance, would have recommended her warmly to my good opinion. Her modesty, her intelligence, would have induced me to feel most kindly, most affectionately towards her, notwithstanding the almost ghastly plainness of her features, the disproportion of her form, the corpse-like lack of animation in her countenance, had I not been aware that every friendly word, every kindly action would be reported by her to her confessor, and by him misinterpreted and poisoned, because he was a Protestant. Once I laid my hand on her head in token of approbation. I thought Sylvie was going to smile. Her dim eye almost kindled, but presently she shrank from me. I was a man and a heretic. She, poor child, a destined nun and devoted Catholic. Thus a fourfold war of separation divided her from mine, her mind from mine. So although they had similar intellects, and they were both, perhaps passionate is not the word to describe Sylvie, they were both fond of learning and knowledge. Some very important differences separated them, and that was mainly their religion. A pert smirk and a hard glance of triumph was Leonie's method of testifying her gratification. Eulalie looked sullen and envious. She had hoped to be first. Hortense and Caroline exchanged a reckless grimace on hearing their names read out somewhere near the bottom of the list. The brand of mental inferiority was considered by them as no disgrace, their hopes for the future being based solely on their personal attractions. He's such a critical man, right? So he judges his students and he says, well, they didn't even care that their grades were not good enough because they hoped their hopes for the future consisted on their personal attractions, on their beauty. That's what he thinks, right? This affair arranged, the regular lesson followed. During a brief interval employed by the pupils in ruling their books, my eye, ranging carelessly over the benches, observed for the first time that the farthest seat in the farthest row, a seat usually vacant, was again filled by the new scholar, the Mademoiselle Henri so ostentatiously recommended to me by the directress. Today I had on my spectacles. Her appearance, therefore, was clear to me at the first glance. I had not to puzzle over it. She looked young. Yet, had I been required to name her exact age, I should have been somewhat nonplussed. The slightness of her figure might have suited 17. A certain anxious and preoccupied expression of face seemed the indication of riper years. She was dressed, like all the rest, in a dark stuff gown and a white collar. Her features were dissimilar to any there, not so rounded, more defined, yet scarcely regular. The shape of her head, too, was different, the superior part more developed, the base considerably less. I felt assured at first sight that she was not a Belgian. Her complexion, her countenance, her lineaments, her figure were all distinct from theirs, and evidently the type of another race, of a race less gifted with fullness of flesh and plenitude of blood, less jocund, material, unthinking. While I first cast my eyes on her, she sat looking fixedly down, her chin resting on her hand, and she did not change her attitude till I commenced the lesson. None of the Belgian girls would have retained one position, and that a reflective one, for the same length of time. Yet, having intimated that her appearance was peculiar, as being unlike that of her Flemish companions, I have little more to say respecting it. I can pronounce no encomiums on her beauty, no praise on her beauty, for she was not beautiful, nor offer condolence on her plainness, for neither was she plain. A careworn character of forehead and a corresponding moulding of the mouth struck me with a sentiment resembling surprise, but these traits would probably have passed unnoticed by any less crotchety observer. Now, reader, though I have spent more than a page in describing Mademoiselle Henri, I know well enough that I have left on your mind's eye no distinct picture of her. And that is true, right? We read like half a page, more than half a page about her. And after reading it, I still have no idea what she is like, what she looks like. Yeah, a very vague description. I have not painted her complexion, nor her eyes, nor her hair, nor even the outline of her shape. You cannot tell whether her nose was aquiline or retroussé, whether her chin was long or short, her face square or oval, nor could I the first day, and it is not my intention to communicate to you at once a knowledge I myself gained by little and little. So he will not give us readers that knowledge yet. In his life, he took the time to find out more about Mademoiselle Henri and what she looked like, so he's not going to give us that um, information just yet. I gave a short exercise, which they all wrote down. I saw the new pupil was puzzled at first with the novelty of the form and language. Once or twice she looked at me with a sort of painful solicitude, as not comprehending at all what I meant. Then she was not ready when the others were. She could not write her phrases so fast as they did. I would not help her. I went on relentless. She looked at me, her eyes said most plainly, I cannot follow you. I disregarded the appeal, and carelessly leaning back in my chair, glancing from time to time with a nonchalant air out of the window, I dictated a little faster. Look how terrible he is. He knows, he feels. He thinks that's how he interprets her look. That she needs help, that she needs things to go slower, and instead he speaks faster. On looking towards her again, I perceived her face clouded with embarrassment, but she was still writing on most diligently. I paused a few seconds. She employed the interval in hurriedly reperusing what she had written, and shame and discomfiture were apparent in her countenance. She evidently found she had made great nonsense of it. In 10 minutes more, the dictation was complete, and having allowed a brief space in which to correct it, I took their books. It was with a reluctant hand Mademoiselle Henri gave up hers, but having once yielded it to my possession, she composed her anxious face as if for the present she had resolved to dismiss regret and had made up her mind to be thought unprecedentedly stupid. Glancing over her exercise, I found that several lines had been omitted, but what was written contained very few faults. I instantly scribed bon at the bottom of the page and returned it to her. She smiled, at first incredulously, then as if reassured, but did not lift her eyes. She could look at me, it seemed, when perplexed and bewildered, but not when gratified. I thought that scarcely fair. And that's the end of chapter 14. You see how William underestimates all of his students, female students, right? So he thought her eyes were begging for help, begging for him to go slower, but in fact, when he checked, what she had written down was had very few faults. So let's take a look at chapter 15, the last one we'll read and discuss today. And I wonder if you are as curious about Mademoiselle Henri as me. Who is this girl? Where does she come from, as she's not a Belgian, as he has noticed? And how come she knows English already, since she made no faults in the exercise, or very few faults? All right, chapter 15. Some time elapsed before I again gave a lesson in the first class. The holiday of Whitsuntide, and that is the Anglican name for Pentecost, the seventh Sunday after Easter. So after this holiday, which occupied 3 days, and on the fourth it was the turn of the second division to receive my instructions. As I made the transit of the Carré, I observed as usual the band of sewers surrounding Mademoiselle Henri. She taught how to sew, right? So the sewers surrounding Mademoiselle Henri. There were only about a dozen of them, but they made as much noise as might have sufficed for 50. They seemed very little under her control. 3 or 4 at once assailed her with importunate requirements. She looked harassed, she demanded silence, but in vain. She saw me, and I read in her eye pain that a stranger should witness the insubordination of her pupils. She seemed to entreat order. Her prayers were useless. Then I remarked that she compressed her lips and contracted her brow, and her countenance, if I read it correctly, said, I have done my best. I seem to merit blame notwithstanding. Blame me then who will. I passed on as I closed the schoolroom door. I heard her say suddenly and sharply, addressing one of the eldest and most turbulent of the lot, Amélie Moulenberg, ask me no question and request of me no assistance for a week to come. During that space of time, I will neither speak to you nor help you. So see how she can be very assertive. Perhaps she can control the situation much more than William anticipated. What we see here is his interpretation, and that is clear in the choice of words, in the choice of language. He writes, I read in her eye pain. That's what he read, that's what he interpreted, but perhaps that's not what was going on. He remarked that she compressed her lips, and her countenance, if I read it correctly, maybe he didn't read it correctly, right? There's more to Mademoiselle Henri than meets the eye, I would say. The words were uttered with emphasis, nay, with vehemence, and a comparative silence followed. Whether the calm was permanent, I know not. Two doors now closed between me and the carré. Next day was appropriated to the first class. On my arrival, I found the directress seated as usual in a chair between the two estrates, and before her was standing Mademoiselle Henri in an attitude, as it seemed to me, again his interpretation, of somewhat reluctant attention. The directress was knitting and talking at the same time. Amidst the hum of a large schoolroom, it was easy so to speak in the ear of one person as to be heard by that person alone, and it was thus Mademoiselle Reuter parleyed with her teacher. The face of the latter was a little flushed, not a little troubled. There was vexation in it, whence resulting I know not, for the directress looked very placid indeed. She could not be scolding in such gentle whispers, and with so equable a mien. No, it was presently proved that her discourse had been of the most friendly tendency, for I heard the closing words. C'est assez, ma bonne amie. À présent, je ne veux pas vous retenir davantage. So, Mademoiselle Reuter calls Mademoiselle Henri ma bonne amie, my good friend. So they're of course close if they use this language. Without reply, Mademoiselle Henri turned away. Dissatisfaction was plainly evinced in her face, and a smile, slight and brief, but bitter, distrustful, and I thought scornful, curled her lip as she took her place in the class. It was a secret, involuntary smile which lasted but a second. An air of depression succeeded, chased away presently by one of attention and interest, when I gave the word for all the pupils to take their reading books. In general, I hated the reading lesson. It was such a torture to the ear to listen to their uncouth mouthing of my native tongue. and no effort, I can only laugh. And no effort of example or precept on my part ever seemed to effect the slightest improvement in their accent. Today, each in her appropriate key, lisped, stuttered, mumbled, and jabbered as usual. About 15 had wrecked me in turn, and my auricular nerve was expecting with resignation in the discords of the 16th, when a full, though low voice read out in clear, correct English. On his way to Perth, the king was met by a Highland woman calling herself a prophetess. She stood at the side of the ferry by which he was about to travel to the north, and cried with a loud voice, My lord the king, if you pass this water, you will never return again alive. Read the history of Scotland. So they were reading out of the history of Scotland. I looked up in amazement. The voice was the voice of Albion. The accent was pure and silvery. It only wanted firmness and assurance to be the counterpart of what any well-educated lady in Essex or Middlesex might have announced. Yet the speaker or reader was no other than Mademoiselle Henri, in whose grave, joyless face I saw no mark of consciousness that she had performed any extraordinary feat. No one else evinced surprise, either. Mademoiselle Reuter knitted away assiduously. I was aware, however, that at the conclusion of the paragraph she had lifted her eyelid and honored me with a glance sideways. She did not know the full excellency of the teacher's style of reading, but she perceived that her accent was not that of the others, and wanted to discover what I thought. I masked my visage with indifference and ordered the next girl to proceed. I wonder why he did that. He does not show approbation in regards to what the girls do well, right? So um, he does not praise them when they do well. So that's also something different from contemporary education. When the lesson was over, I took advantage of the confusion caused by breaking up To approach Mademoiselle Henri. She was standing near the window and retired as I advanced. She thought I wanted to look out, and did not imagine that I could have anything to say to her. I took her exercise book out of her hand. As I turned over the leaves, I addressed her. You have had lessons in English before? I asked. No, sir. No. You read it well. You have been in England. Oh, no. With some animation. You have been in English families. Still the answer was no. Here my eye, resting on the flyleaf of the book, saw written Francis Evan Henri. Your name? I asked. Yes, sir. My interrogations were cut short. I heard a little rustling behind me, and close at my back was a directress, professing to be examining the interior of a desk. Mademoiselle, said she, looking up and addressing the teacher, will you have the goodness to go and stand in the corridor while the young ladies are putting on their things and try to keep some order? Mademoiselle Henri obeyed. What splendid weather, observed the directress cheerfully, glancing at the same time from the window. I assented and was withdrawing. What of your new pupil, monsieur? Continued she, following my retreating steps. Is she likely to make progress in English? Indeed, I can hardly judge. She possesses a pretty good accent. Of her real knowledge of the language, I have as yet had no opportunity of forming an opinion. In her natural capacity, monsieur? I have had my fears about that. Can you relieve me by an assurance at least of its average powers? I see no reason to doubt its average power, mademoiselle, but really I scarcely know her and have not had time to study the caliber of her capacity. I wish you a very good afternoon. She still pursued me. You will observe, monsieur, and tell me what you think. I could so much better rely on your opinion than on my own. Women cannot judge of these things as men can, and excuse my pertinacity, monsieur, but it is natural I should feel interested about this poor little girl, pauvre petite. She has scarcely any relations. Her own efforts are all she has to look to. Her acquirements must be her sole fortune. Her present position has once been mine, or nearly so. It is then but natural I should sympathize with her. And sometimes when I see the difficulty she has in managing pupils, I reel quite chagrined. I doubt not she does her best. Her intentions are excellent. But, monsieur, she wants tact and firmness. I have talked to her on the subject, but I am not fluent, and probably did not express myself with clearness. She never appears to comprehend me. Now, would you occasionally, when you see an opportunity, slip in a word of advice to her on the subject? Men have so much more influence than women have. They argue so much more logically than we do. And you, monsieur, in particular, have so paramount of power of making yourself obeyed. Now, I'm not sure if she's being truthful here or if she's being sarcastic when she says all of that about men having more influence than women, um, about women not being able to judge these things as men. So I think she's being sarcastic here, right? And she's using her power to, she knows how to handle William. So she needs to praise him and to boost his confidence in order to get what she wants. Um, A word of advice from you could not but do her good, even if she were sullen and headstrong, which I hope she's not. She would scarcely refuse to listen to you. For my own part, I can truly say that I never attend one of your lessons without deriving benefit from witnessing your management of the pupils. She keeps praising him. The other masters are a constant source of anxiety to me. They cannot impress the young ladies with sentiments of respect, nor restrain the levity natural to youth. In you, monsieur, I feel the most absolute confidence. Try then to put this poor child into the way of controlling our giddy, high-spirited Brabantoises from Brabant. But, monsieur, I would add one word more. Don't alarm her amour-propre, her self-love, her self-esteem. Beware of inflicting a wound there. I reluctantly admit that in that particular she is blamably, some would say ridiculously, susceptible. I fear I have touched this sore point inadvertently, and she cannot get over it. During the greater part of this harangue, my hand was on the lock of the outer door. I now turned it. Au revoir, mademoiselle, said I, and I escaped. I saw the directress' stock of words was yet far from exhausted. She looked after me. She would fain have detained me longer. Her manner towards me had been altered ever since I had begun to treat her with hardness and indifference. She almost cringed to me on every occasion. She consulted my countenance incessantly, and beset me with innumerable little officious attentions. Servility creates despotism. Look at that. This slavish homage, instead of softening my heart, only pampered whatever was stern and exacting in its mood. The very circumstance of her hovering round me like a fascinated bird seemed to transform me into a rigid pillar of stone. Her flatteries irritated my scorn, her blandishments confirmed my reserve. At times I wondered what she meant by giving herself such trouble to win me, when the more profitable Pelé was already in her nets, and when too she was aware that I possessed her secret, for I had not scrupled to tell her as much. But the fact is that, as it was her nature to doubt the reality and undervalue the worth of modesty, affection, disinterestedness, to regard these qualities as foibles of character, so it was equally her tendency to consider pride, hardness, selfishness as proofs of strength. She would trample on the neck of humility, she would kneel at the feet of disdain, she would meet tenderness with secret contempt, indifference she would woo with ceaseless assiduities. Benevolence, devotedness, enthusiasm were her antipathies. For dissimulation and self interest, she had a preference. They were real wisdom in her eyes. Moral and physical degradation, mental and bodily inferiority, she regarded with indulgence. They were foils capable of being turned to good account as set offs for her own endowments. To violence, injustice, tyranny, she succumbed. They were her natural masters. She had no propensity to hate, no impulse to resist them. The indignation their behests awakened some hearts was unknown in hers. From all this it resulted that the false and selfish called her wise, the vulgar and debased termed her charitable, the insolent and unjust dubbed her amiable, the conscientious and benevolent generally at first accepted as valid her claim to be considered one of themselves, but ere long the plating of pretension wore off, the real material appeared below, and they laid her aside as a deception. So he's pretty harsh on Mademoiselle Reuter here, right? He tells that her what she praises is not benevolence and devotedness and enthusiasm. No, what she preferred was dissimulation, self interest, violence, injustice, tyranny. That's what she succumbed to. So, and the people that thought she was such a good person, like him in the beginning, would only be deceived, like he was indeed. All right, and here is the end of chapter 15. Next time, we're going to continue with chapter 16, 17, and 18. We'll see, we'll know more about this new character, Mademoiselle Henri. We'll know more about the relationship between William Crimsworth and the headmistress, Mademoiselle Reuters, and also the role of Monsieur Pelé in all of this. And this is what we'll do next week. So that will be in 1 week, the 21st of March. Same time, same place. I will see you here. Hope to see you live. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.